thoughts about important reality check, and we're going to go into greater depth with this panel right now with Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of State Anita Friedt and Gaukhar Mukhatzhanova from the Center for Non-Proliferation Studies. And let me just provide a brief introduction as we begin to remind us, as many of you know, we're just over 5 months away from the once every 5 years review conference for the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is the bedrock of the global nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament enterprise. And without the NPT, we certainly would be facing greater nuclear dangers, but the NPT by itself does not mean that we do not still face serious proliferation risks and the threat of that nuclear weapons might one day be used again. It's a constant work in progress to ensure that implementation of the treaty's provisions occurs and that cooperation takes place to find ways to update and reinforce the basic provisions of the NPT. So the review conference is basically an opportunity to take stock and an opportunity to renew and update the member states' solemn legal and political commitments to each of the treaty's provisions. And as you'll recall, 5 years ago, the 2010 NPT review conference was generally considered to be a roaring success because the parties had succeeded in reaching consensus on a far-reaching and detailed 65-point action plan covering all three of the treaty's pillars. However, as we just heard from Des Brown, and I think many other observers would agree, follow-through on many parts of the action plan, particularly the 22 interrelated disarmament steps, is considered to have been disappointing in many respects. This is exacerbated by the fact that each of the 5 original nuclear weapon states, the 5 NPT weapon states, are either modernizing their existing nuclear stockpiles or improving them. So the 2015 NPT review conference, as you'll hear from our 2 panelists, is shaping up to be very different in style and perhaps substance from the 2010 conference. And so we've put this panel together to take a look at the situation 5 months ahead and to discuss the issues that are going to be reviewed and considered in what the United States and other countries believe would constitute a successful review conference outcome. And I'm hoping that Anita and Gaukhar can offer their thoughts about what steps key states can take ahead of and during and after the review conference to strengthen the global non-proliferation and disarmament effort. So as I said, first we'll hear from the U.S. State Department's Anita Friedt. She's Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Nuclear and Strategic Policy in the Bureau of Arms Control Verification and Compliance. And somewhere that all fits on a business card, that long title. She has been working at the State Department for over 33 years. Prior to her current post at the AVC Bureau, she was serving as Director for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation at the National Security Council from 2009 to 2011. She has many years of experience, particularly with respect to European foreign policy and U.S.-Russian affairs. And then following her remarks, we're going to hear from Gaukhar, who is, I must say, one of the leading lights and voices on NPT issues. She has spent a great deal of time observing and writing, and I've been very impressed with her presentations and her observations. And so we're very glad to have her here with us today to talk about the upcoming review conference. She has, I'll note, served as an expert on the delegation of Kazakhstan to the 2010 NPT review conference and the 2009 preparatory committee meeting. She's now the director of the International Organizations and Non-Proliferation Program at the Center for Non-Proliferation Studies here in Washington, just a couple blocks away from ACA World Headquarters at 13th and L. So with that, let me turn over the microphone to Anita, and after each of them speak, we'll get in once again to a discussion with you. We should have ample time before we begin wrapping up around 2 o'clock. So, Anita, thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Daryl. Thank you for the introduction, and thanks to the Arms Control Association for hosting this event. I have to say it's a great pleasure to be here, and I'm sorry I missed the early morning session, but I certainly will look forward to reading, especially the latest publication that both you and Lord Brown mentioned. I also wanted to mention that I was particularly pleased to hear Lord Brown, who preceded me here. I came early just so I could hear his talks. He really has many profound and very experienced observers in this very room, but I mean, his remarks are very, very, very good. So let me start. What I'd like to do is to take a few minutes, and I know many of you will say, I've heard this before, but this is the administration's view, and so I am very pleased to present it and then answer questions. But I'd like to take a few minutes to talk about the United States goals and vision for the 2015 Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference, as well as our efforts to strengthen the global nuclear non-proliferation regime. After that, I look forward to your questions, certainly. So as Undersecretary Rose Gaukhar stated earlier this month at the United Nations General Assembly First Committee, the United States continues to work on all fronts towards the peace and security of a world free of nuclear weapons. We're pursuing and seeking to create opportunities to further reduce nuclear arsenals, increase confidence and transparency, and cooperate on non-proliferation. As Undersecretary Gaukhar said, reaching these goals is a long and often difficult process. You'll hear this many times, and I will continue to repeat it. It is a long and difficult process. But we press ahead because we know that but only by continuing our committed, serious work on reducing the threat posed by weapons of mass destruction can we ensure safety and security for the generations to come. The threats we face in the world today remind us all that our work on non-proliferation and disarmament is critical. The challenges to the NPT are real, but the treaty is far too important to fail or to be held hostage to impractical demands or agendas that impede lasting progress. A successful review conference in 2015 is a priority for the United States. As Daryl and others have said, we clearly face a challenging conference, but again, we want to make this conference as successful as possible. The United States is committed to pursuing a responsible approach to nuclear disarmament in keeping with our NPT commitment, and I'd like to elaborate on what this means to us. In short, we seek to create and pursue opportunities with our partners to reduce nuclear arsenals, increase confidence and transparency, and cooperate on non-proliferation. We do not have a predetermined set of steps that must be taken in any specific order toward nuclear disarmament. Again, here I will repeat this again. Slow progress in one area will not deter us from seeking headway in others. So there's constant criticism about the pace of disarmament, especially by the P5. One, it has to be a step-by-step process. It's the only responsible way to move forward. And slow progress in one area cannot and will not deter us from seeking headway in others. Through persistent effort and a clear mandate to reduce nuclear threats, we have made real progress over the last 40 years, and especially over the past 6 years. We have dismantled approximately 1,300 nuclear warheads since 2009. Our nuclear stockpile has dropped 85% from its Cold War peak. Through the New START Treaty, our deployed nuclear forces will drop further to levels not seen since the days of President Eisenhower. New START is being implemented in a business-like manner, and it continues to reinforce strategic stability. The treaty remains mutually beneficial for the security interests of the United States and Russia. President Obama has made clear our readiness to discuss further nuclear reductions with the Russian Federation, but progress obviously requires a willing partner and a conducive strategic environment. It is no secret, as we've discussed here today, that there are issues on which the United States and Russia disagree. In the nuclear realm, we are urging Russia to help us preserve the mutual benefits of the INF Treaty by resolving our concerns and returning to verifiable compliance with the treaty. We believe this treaty, the INF Treaty, remains in the interests of Russia, the United States, and our allies in Europe and Asia. Despite our disagreements on important issues, and certainly including Ukraine, we should not stop trying to move ahead in this step-by-step fashion on arms control, non-proliferation, and disarmament. The United States and Russia work together to help remove and eliminate Syria's declared chemical weapons, and we are together at the negotiating table with Iran on its nuclear program. Even in the past, and certainly during the Cold War, during the tensest of moments, working together on reducing the nuclear threat has been an important area of U.S. and Russian leadership, and it continues to be so. Of course, progress towards disarmament is not just the responsibility of the United States and Russia. All states can and must contribute to the conditions for disarmament as well as non-proliferation. They are two sides of the same coin. And by all states, I do mean all states, not just the nuclear states. In addition to our bilateral efforts, we have continued to engage, as Lord Brown spoke, in the P5 process to help advance dialogue on nuclear issues. P5 engagement is a long-term investment designed to strengthen the NPT, build trust, and create a stronger foundation to pursue steps toward our goal of a world without nuclear weapons. Again, a long-term investment. There's a lot of criticism about the pace of the progress and the activities of the P5, but it is a long-term investment and very important in terms, especially in terms of confidence-building, transparency issues. The process has made some gains. Collectively, we reached agreement on a standard NPT reporting framework and submitted our first reports at this year's NPT PrepCom. We've also exchanged briefings on best practices, implementing nuclear arms control agreements, such as inspections under New START, and committed to continue work on a P5 glossary that will increase mutual understanding. Even as we finalize the first phase of this glossary work, we are engaging with our P5 partners on how to take this effort forward, including by addressing concepts relevant to future agreements. Ongoing P5 work on critical comprehensive nuclear test ban treaty inspection techniques will help enhance the treaty's verification regime. We also seek to ensure that international verification of NPT obligations remains effective and robust, and that parties uphold the integrity of the treaty by addressing non-compliance. NPT parties should be clear on this point. IAEA safeguards benefit every party and create confidence that facilitates the fullest possible cooperation in peaceful uses of nuclear energy. It is of paramount importance that the IAEA continue to have the authority it needs to implement safeguards and that member states provide the resources necessary that meet our common expectations to fulfill the agency's mandate. A key priority is to promote the IAEA Additional Protocol, which, combined with a comprehensive safeguards agreement, represents the accepted standard for verification that states are meeting the NPT's safeguards requirements. We are prepared to help any state seeking assistance to implement its safeguards obligations. We will also seek consensus on the need to address treaty violations and on recommendations to address potential abuse of the right to withdraw from the NPT. As part of our commitment to the NPT, the United States has signed the protocols to the nuclear weapon free zone treaties in Africa, Central Asia, and the South Pacific. We are working with ASEAN states and the P5 to soon sign the protocol to the Southeast Asian Nuclear Weapon Free Zone Treaty. We have been a party to the Latin America treaty protocols for many years and would hope that the Senate would provide its advice and consent to the other treaty protocols that have been transmitted to the Senate for consideration. This would be a very positive step and would be well received by all NPT parties. Now, I would also like to stress U.S. leadership in supporting peaceful nuclear energy, with parties meeting their non-proliferation obligations. The U.S. is on record, the U.S. record on promoting the availability and sharing of peaceful benefits of the atom speaks for itself. We have civil nuclear cooperation agreements in force, permitting peaceful nuclear cooperation with 46 states, Taiwan, and the IAEA. We are also pursuing agreements with additional partners. In addition, the United States is by far the largest contributor to the IAEA peaceful use programs, including about $150 million in voluntary contributions since 2010, and another $50 million toward the IAEA Peaceful Uses Initiative that we helped launch. These Peaceful Uses Initiative programs have addressed the sustainable development needs of over 120 member states in areas such as human health, water resource management, food security, environmental protection, and nuclear power infrastructure development. We encourage other member states to join us in supporting this initiative. Another priority is encouraging new frameworks for peaceful nuclear cooperation that reduce proliferation risks, including through the IAEA Fuel Bank and similar assured fuel supply arrangements. So, as you can see, the United States takes this work very seriously. There is much work happening and but also much more to be done. As Undersecretary Gaukhar said to our friends and colleagues from around the world in New York the week before last, we are under no illusions that a single solution can put an end to the threat from weapons of mass destruction. That is why we must work together, all of us, to find common ground based on a shared desire to eliminate the threat posed by nuclear weapons. By focusing on our mutual commitments to the NPT and other international agreements, we can succeed in reaching a safer world together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anita. All right, now, Gaukhar, if you could provide your perspectives on the upcoming conference and the issues that they will be grappling with. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Daryl, and thank you and Arms Control Association for inviting me and for the kind introduction earlier. And as was already mentioned, following Des Brown is both a delight and a challenge, considering he covered a lot of the ground that we presumably were going to as well in our panel, but I think it's also a very good conversation starter right there. So I was asked to talk a little bit about the main issues facing the upcoming review conference, and then dive a little more into the role of different key states and groupings in terms of bringing about a positive outcome, however they might define a positive outcome of a review conference. And I recognize that there might actually be differences in what different countries view as a desirable outcome of the RevCon next year. I will not be terribly original in identifying the main issues before the RevCon. I think most of us who have ever followed the NPT would have no difficulty with that. The Middle East and the zone, or lack thereof, free of weapons of mass destruction in the Middle East, and the as yet to be convened conference of states in the Middle East will be one of the central topics. And as already was mentioned, the conference was supposed to take place by the end of 2012. That did not happen for a variety of reasons, and failure to convene that conference before the RevCon, in my view, will poison the debate tremendously across all issues at the review conference, be it disarmament, regional issues, non-proliferation. That bad atmosphere will find a way to spill over everything. And so in that case, it's really hard to talk about any kind of forward-looking agreement, really constructive one for the future review cycle. But even if we do succeed in having the Middle East conference, and even if it is successful in the sense of establishing some kind of a process going forward for the zone, the positive outcome of the review conference is also far from guaranteed. And that is directly tied to the two other issues that I will talk about, and they are very much linked to each other. That is the nuclear disarmament and the progress on nuclear disarmament, and the review and the future of the action plan that was adopted in 2010. The action plan covers all three pillars of the NPT, but the history of its negotiation shows that really it was the disarmament section of it that was central to the outcome to the positive outcome, and therefore a lot of focus is on the implementation of the action plan. And as Lord Brown already talked about, the implementation is decidedly lacking, and there are different civil society reports on that, and then states individually have followed it. And over the past 3 preparatory committee meetings, we have increasingly heard that frustration with the fact that what was perceived as a great success and way forward has really been disappointing since 2010. That said, there is no consensus among states parties about what constitutes the appropriate pace of implementation of the action plan. And there, the divergences have been growing and got very pronounced at the last preparatory committee meeting in May. And I've just come back from the first committee in New York, and I can still see that nuclear weapon states and non-nuclear weapon states view the action plan very differently. From nuclear weapon states, especially France or Russia, you would hear things like a roadmap, the one and only path for disarmament under the NPT, and in that sense, they're looking at a very long-term prospect, sort of very over-the-horizon view. Majority of non-nuclear weapon states do not share that view. They did adopt the action plan with a bit more urgency in mind, but they did not necessarily expect it to be implemented by 2015. And that's where the problem lies right now. What are the reasonable expectations about the action plan? And tied to that, what are we going to do about the action plan come 2015? And the statement I've heard from various parties already is that the simple rollover is not acceptable. It will absolutely not be enough to come to the review conference and just say, we reaffirm the action plan of 2010, and let's keep working. And that would be ideal outcome for France. But for most other countries, it would be absolutely not enough. What will be enough for them is not clear yet. And that's the big challenge for non-nuclear weapon states, to figure out where the priorities lie, what kind of benchmarks they want to attach to the action plan, how do they want to build upon the action plan. They will need to figure it out from now until April 2015, or preferably earlier, so that they can actually work on some kind of coordinated position to the extent that it's at all possible in the setting like the NPT. Another debate that has been tied to the action plan and this frustration with the very, very slow step-by-step approach is the very approach to nuclear disarmament. Are we really following the right modality? Is step-by-step really end all in terms of advancing nuclear disarmament? And that's why you've heard over the past years a lot more conversation about bringing back the Nuclear Weapons Convention idea, putting forward the nuclear weapons ban idea. And that has been the product of this frustration with the lack of urgency that non-nuclear weapon states see in the efforts of nuclear weapon states. So that will be very, very central at the review conference, along with this new discourse, which is not entirely new because it's really going back to the fundamentals of the NPT, and that is the humanitarian initiative. Like other initiatives that we've seen in past years, such as the Open-Ended Working Group on Disarmament, the High-Level Meeting on Disarmament, the humanitarian initiative is also a product of this frustration. And I really liked the quote earlier that frustration sometimes leads to elevation. And the humanitarian debate has been the most significant development, really, since 2010 in terms of mobilizing states and mobilizing civil society, and to some extent mobilizing the public around the question of nuclear disarmament. And the initial strategy of nuclear weapon states of dismissing and somehow trying to disregard the humanitarian initiative hasn't worked. Far from running out of steam, the initiative has gained momentum. And in fact, just a couple of hours ago in New York, New Zealand delivered another joint statement on behalf of 155 states this time on the humanitarian dimension. So that really speaks to the importance that NPT states parties attach to this. This is not going away, and this will be front and center in the disarmament conversation at the NPT review conference. Now, what does it practically mean? How does the humanitarian initiative translate into the NPT RIFCON debate? Again, that remains to be seen. And again, there is no consensus among non-nuclear weapon states participating in the initiative about the appropriate way forward and how it should be integrated into the NPT. There is a broad agreement that we need urgency, and the humanitarian dimension is trying to bring that sense of urgency into nuclear disarmament. There is a broad recognition that we have to frame nuclear disarmament debate about the future of it in the humanitarian terms, about the concern for human beings, not the security concerns of a couple of states. Beyond that, there are very few specifics, and some states do support the idea of negotiating a nuclear weapons ban. Does it mean they're ready to start tomorrow? Probably not. What are they ready to start tomorrow? Again, that is something that they will have to define in slightly more concrete terms going into the review conference so that they can more effectively press for this issue. Whether that would translate into just more progressive language on the humanitarian dimension in the final document, maybe, but that seems like an utterly insufficient outcome of this tremendous mobilization that we've seen. And one of the ways that this could go is tied to an important grouping in the NPT, and that is the New Agenda Coalition. The New Agenda Coalition has seen a resurgence in the past 2 years, very much tied to the open-ended working group. That's where they really got together again. And then inspired also by the humanitarian initiative, the NAC tabled a working paper at the last PrepCom that they want to take forward into the RevCon, but also going into other fora beyond 2015. And the paper talks about the different modalities for nuclear disarmament. It talks about the need for legally binding instrument of some kind. And there they leave the question open. They put different options on the table on the basis of what they've heard from other states, what they have themselves have discussed. So they have an annex to that paper that talks about, what are the pros and cons of nuclear weapons convention, of a nuclear weapons ban, of a framework agreement, of a set of different agreements that would include things like CTBT, like FMCT, but also going beyond. And this is an important development because it's an invitation to a conversation. And I think what nuclear weapon states could do very usefully between now and the RevCon and beyond is to accept that invitation for conversation and see how that can usefully be integrated into the review conference process. They absolutely need to demonstrate the willingness to have that exchange rather than what we've seen up to date as to, our approach is the best approach and this is really end of the conversation. You can have your conferences, but really that does not affect what we think is the realistic and pragmatic way forward. I think the number of countries that have signed up to the humanitarian initiative and the number of countries that have already called for some kind of legally binding instrument really says that they deserve a more constructive, more honest exchange about what is it we are looking forward to in terms of nuclear disarmament and concrete steps beyond FMCT, because so far the discussion of steps in disarmament tends to end at the negotiation of the FMCT. What could nuclear weapon states usefully do as well is, as Lord Brown said, go to the humanitarian conference in Vienna. And their positions matter much more than the P5 has let on previously. I think the so-called solidarity has fractured a little bit around this issue. And so it would really help the United States in particular if the United States were to go and sort of reduce a bit the tension and demonstrate its own willingness to have this conversation and take that responsibility. The NATO states have a role to play because, again, the recent debates have exposed differences not only between nuclear weapon states and non-nuclear weapon states, but among non-nuclear weapon states about the urgency of nuclear disarmament and in some cases even its desirability. We've heard statements from some of the alliance members, not only from Europe but also from Asia, that maybe the goal is fewer nuclear weapons, not necessarily no nuclear weapons. And that's a very worrying sign, of course, for other states parties. So states in nuclear alliances have to take their responsibility for the commitments under Article 6 and demonstrate how they can move away from the reliance on nuclear weapons. And that's something that has been brought up by Lord Brown, that they really need to re-examine the role of nuclear weapons in those alliances and whether or not it is acceptable for them to rely on nuclear weapons for their security. The United States, well, actually, before I proceed to the United States, the P5 process. A lot of states have looked to the newly established P5 process for some signs of progress, and there the nuclear weapon states can demonstrate progress by at least putting forward a forward-looking agenda beyond 2015. So really outline what you're going to do, that you're willing to work on nuclear disarmament. And there I understand opportunities are quite limited, again, because of the diversity of views. But one thing that is realistic is to focus on areas like transparency and verification. A joint project of the P5 on exploring disarmament verification issues, I think, would be a tremendously positive sign for non-nuclear weapon states that, that very serious work is being put into that and very serious thinking into the actual practical aspects of nuclear disarmament. And as for the United States, I think the issue that was discussed earlier about the modernization and the tremendous amount of money put into it, I think that's where the opportunity lies for the United States to re-examine its position, to revise its modernization plans. And there are different reasons for that. Domestically, budget concerns, and also just the practical thinking of whether we militarily we need that. But it will also send a very good signal outside, because right now, the modernization plans by everybody, but especially the United States, is very clearly telling non-nuclear weapon states that the nuclear weapons are here to stay for decades and decades, and the nuclear weapon states have no intention of reducing their reliance on them, because you cannot invest $1 trillion into something that you plan to get rid of in any kind of foreseeable future. So revising that would really help strengthen the U.S. position going into the NPT review conference. I think I'll stop here because Daryl is a little, no?
Oh, that's good.
Very good. Thank you. You've both given us a lot to consider. I want to open up the floor to questions, suggestions. So we'll start with Ed Ift up front, and then we'll go to Martin Fleck in the back.
Thank you. Edward Ift, Georgetown University. Could you say a little more about the legal aspects of the ban treaty? For example, if a state with nuclear weapons joined the ban treaty, what legal obligations would it be accepting? Thank you.
I assume that's a question for Gaukhar since the, yes, okay. All right. And why don't we go with Martin in the back? Take two at a time, please.
Thank you for being here, Ms. Friedt. And I know you've been hearing from a lot of people, including people on the panel today, and in the earlier discussion, urging you to the State Department to send a delegation to Vienna. And 146 nations attended the Mexico conference. That's 3/4 of the nations of the world. The absence of the United States is becoming more noticeable. So I wanted to put the question to you: will the United States send a delegation to Vienna in December?
All right. So why don't you start, Gaukhar, and then we'll go to the next question. Yeah.
I will try to answer the nuclear weapons ban question, but it's really a question to the civil society primarily, who have been behind this idea of a nuclear weapons ban. And there, the distinction from the Nuclear Weapons Convention, for example, is that it would be just a normative prohibition of nuclear weapons. It will not carry within itself a dismantlement program. So there's no verification to speak of, an actual schedule of disarmament. It's really just to establish a norm that these weapons are unacceptable, that they are illegal. What would that mean for a nuclear weapon state? I think the idea that was put forward is that a nuclear weapon state can join the ban and then have some kind of a protocol attached on its disarmament program. Now, I'm not a lawyer, so I haven't really gone into it, and this is a very good question. And that is a question that has to be discussed by states, especially between the states that do support the ban idea and the nuclear weapon states. And that brings us back to this point of where to have that conversation. Is the NPT review conference the proper space for that? And if not, where is the space for that? Do we need to go back to the open-ended working group, for example, because that was an official UN setting, but it didn't presuppose a negotiation. So it was a very safe space to discuss a lot of these things. It was a lost opportunity back in 2013 for nuclear weapon states to come and discuss, but this should not preclude them from supporting it in the future and raise these kinds of issues. What do you mean by the nuclear weapons ban? How is it compatible with the NPT? What are the legal implications? These are all valid questions that need to be addressed in some kind of forum where both parties are willing to engage.
Just one other quick point on this. We have to keep in mind that there are, as I think of it, there are three different variations on this concept. there's the normative ban on the existence of nuclear weapons, the possession of nuclear weapons. There is a ban on the use of nuclear weapons under all or certain circumstances, much as the 1925 Geneva Protocol on chemical weapons. And then there is a convention or a framework leading to the elimination of nuclear weapons. So these are all concepts that are bandied about. One of the useful things about the paper that was mentioned, the New Agenda Coalition paper, is that it lays out these different concepts for discussion. And so they're all concepts that could potentially be discussed in the right forum. And I would just quickly add, there's one other legal issue that I think is worth the states discussing at the NPT review conference, because one of the commitments made in 2010 was that the NPT nuclear weapon states should diminish the role and significance of nuclear weapons and discuss policies that could prevent the use of nuclear weapons. All right, so that was an obligation. So one of the ways in which one might pursue that or discuss that would be for the nuclear weapon states in the context of the NPT review conference or some other context to explain their legal rationale for their nuclear war plans, their nuclear weapons employment plans. And I would just point out that the United States asserts that U.S. war plans will apply the principles of distinction and proportionality and seek to minimize collateral damage to civilian populations and civilian objects. The United States will not intentionally target civilian populations or civilian objects. That comes from the Nuclear Posture Review report. Well, that's a very interesting statement, given what we know nuclear weapons can do. I would find it very interesting to find out how the Defense Department lawyers would try to explain that assertion. So, I mean, these kinds of issues are some of the ways in which these issues can be explored. There are myriad ways of doing it. I think, Des Brown offered one option for doing so. We've heard a couple others here. So there are many different ways at going at this, but I think there are more questions at this stage than answers. So let me stop there, and let me ask Anita to get to the question that was asked about the U.S. decision about the Vienna conference and where that stands.
I thought we were going to skip that. No. Okay. No, happy to answer that. And thank you. And thanks to everyone who has been lobbying. I have to say that since this movement, and Gaukhar was very good at explaining the whole genesis of it, I think that there certainly is a greater awareness and interest in the humanitarian impact. But I will start, first of all, to say that the United States, of all countries, knows better than any other country what the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons can be. And that is one of the reasons that we are working on disarmament. That is a priority for us and remains a priority. Secondly, certainly interested and always willing to listen to others and about this. We also certainly appreciate the education portion of this. I have to say one of the most interesting comments from many younger generation colleagues has been the point about P5 participation in the humanitarian impact has been, we as young people did not grow up in the Cold War. We did not grow up in the 1960s where we had to do the duck and cover as I did and many of you here have done. So we really don't understand. So certainly humanitarian education is fine, certainly agree with that objective. But one of the biggest problems that we have had, the P5, I'll speak loosely. I mean, obviously, I'm speaking for the United States, and the P5 did not attend the first two conferences in Oslo and also not in Mexico or in Nayarit in Mexico. But one of the biggest problems we have is this off-ramp. We have that this seems to be a convenient way to try to accelerate process, and I'm afraid it's not a realistic way. We have 2010 NPT review conference has a 64-point action plan. That action plan there's a lot of work. There's a lot of work for the P5. There's a lot of work for every single signatory of the NPT of the treaty, and that should be our focus. What I think happens too often, and as I mentioned in my remarks over and over again, then this is certainly, as Gaukhar said, a point of debate. What should be the pace of disarmament? Disarmament is not easy. Taking the steps to verifiably reduce and disarm is not easy. It does not happen magically, does not happen overnight. And one of the biggest challenges we have with the humanitarian impact, or the movement that works to outlaw nuclear weapons, is that this is a shortcut and diverts attention from the very real focus that we think we should have, which is the actual hard work that is behind implementation of the 64-point action plan and the hard work of disarmament. So the bottom line is we have not, and you will have heard this again, we have not yet, we have the invitation from the Austrians for the conference, but we have not yet, the United States has not yet made a decision as to whether to attend or not.
All right. And let me just note, there will, in the November issue of Arms Control Today, be a long interview with Undersecretary of State Rose Gutmuller. One of the questions we asked her was about the conference. There'll be, I guess I could say, a similar answer that will be described, but she goes into a little bit, she will go into a little bit more detail about some of the questions the U.S. is considering as it makes this decision. So just a plug for the forthcoming issue of Arms Control Today. All right, we have a few people with their hands up. Let's come up here to the media table, please, and then we'll catch as many as we can. We're doing well for time. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. My name is Miho Takashima with Tokyo Broadcasting System. I'd like to address a question to Deputy Assistant Secretary Friedt. I'd like to turn over to my region of the world, North Korea. Usually when we look at the U.S. government, we see some sort of willingness or motivation on the U.S. side to get engaged with the North Korean government on the second term of their administration. So far, I don't see that sort of appetite coming out of the Obama administration. Is it yet to be waited? I mean, do we wait, or is it that your priority is tied up with the development going on in the Middle East, trying to strike a deal with Iran, or is it that by analyzing all the intelligence, you still feel like you have more time in terms of dealing with North Korea? How do we see a path forward here? Thank you.
All right, why don't we take one more right up here, please, Sherman? Thanks.
Hi there. I'm Jim Finucane, Georgetown University. I've heard a lot of discussion about getting rid of all nuclear weapons and a lot of references to the P5, but this seems to ignore 4 nuclear weapon states that are not signatories to the NPT. I wonder if they're ever going to get involved in this process.
All right. All right. Well, why don't, if you could each of you address those questions as you see fit. Why don't you go ahead, Anita?
Sure. Thanks. A very good question about North Korea, and you're a very astute observer that it does seem to follow that at the end of at least U.S. administrations, there's a push to, or there is an engagement. I would argue that is just as much because of the North Korean regime as it is of the U.S. and other countries who are working to engage. The challenge is, first of all, it remains a huge priority, a very high priority for the United States to deal with the North Korean issue, and we're constantly working it. It's not that we're focused on the Middle East. We are focused on the Middle East, on Iran, but we certainly have the wherewithal to do all of it, and we do have a negotiator. We have our colleague who is still working on North Korea and very much engaged on it. In fact, all eyes on it. At the moment, the conditions are just not ripe for negotiations or for engagement with North Korea. So we hope that they will be. It's North Korea that continues to be the big challenge. And I think you've seen some of the, I don't know how to describe it, the interesting stories in the last few months, or weeks, I should say, about the North Korean regime and some of the worrisome signs, even more worrisome than usual, about their leadership lineup. But we're certainly engaged and willing, or certainly it's a high priority.
Well, I think the question was specifically about those outside the NPT, which by definition means they cannot be engaged in the NPT review conference conversation on nuclear disarmament. They have never signed, or well, with the exception of North Korea, and the debate is still kind of out there whether they left the NPT properly or not. But the other three never signed the NPT, never took up the Article 6 obligations to pursue negotiations towards nuclear disarmament. So legally, it's very hard to point at them and say, you are not living up to your commitments. That said, when in 1996 the International Court of Justice gave its advisory opinion, it seemed to suggest that there exists a legal obligation to pursue negotiations towards nuclear disarmament, and they didn't mention specifically NPT states parties. They just talked about, generally speaking, legal obligation. And that has been actually, interestingly, the basis for the lawsuit that the Marshall Islands have filed against all nuclear weapons possessors with the ICJ back in April, I believe. So it's going to be interesting to see where that goes. I think they primarily targeted the NPT states parties because the case on statutory law about, not statutory, the common law about the non-NPT parties is going to be a bit weaker. That said, India and Pakistan both came to the humanitarian impact conferences in Oslo and Nairobi. They also both participated in the work of the Open-Ended Working Group on Nuclear Disarmament in Geneva. Were they particularly targeted at those meetings? No. Were they particularly helpful with their contributions? Not necessarily. But at least they actually came there and sat there and listened to everything people had to say about the effects of nuclear weapons and their concerns. And no, they were not singled out. And some nuclear weapon states, the NPT states, have said, well, they got an easy pass. But it wasn't the point to get the possessors in the room and point fingers at them. We do that regularly in the first committee and the NPT. The point of those conferences was to gather in the room and talk about the weapons and what those weapons do. And I think that's an additional appeal of those kinds of fora where you can gather states from inside and outside the NPT and engage on those conversations. And in some sense, the proposals for a new instrument on nuclear weapons, like the Nuclear Weapons Convention or Nuclear Weapons Ban, is also that it would involve states outside the NPT. Because let's admit it, we're not getting India, Pakistan, and Israel into the NPT. There is a process of annual lamentation about the importance of universality of the NPT, and nobody's doing absolutely nothing about it. That was a double negation, sorry. Nobody is doing absolutely anything about it. And even worse, we seem to have encouraged India and rewarded it for staying outside the NPT and holding on to nuclear weapons steadfastly. So if the NPT clearly is not working to get those countries into the disarmament process, what will? And neglecting all kinds of proposals that go broader than the NPT, I don't think is a very helpful approach in this regard.
If I could offer one observation and a wild suggestion about this problem. As we've discussed in the last several minutes, the humanitarian impacts dialogue it's an expression of frustration about the pace of progress. It applies not just to the states with nuclear weapons who are in the NPT, but all nuclear-armed countries. And I think that the states involved in the Humanitarian Impacts Conference themselves need to be thinking much more creatively about how they can, beyond the conferences on humanitarian impacts, involve and engage India, Pakistan, Israel, eventually North Korea, who are outside the NPT. And the nuclear weapon states in the NPT need to do so also. The question is how, and there's maybe a unique opportunity and convergence of events coming up, which is that the 2015 NPT Review Conference comes in the 70th year after the first use of nuclear weapons in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. There may be an opportunity to have a gathering that is more than just a meeting of representatives of states to express their tired positions about all of these different issues, but an actual gathering of leaders to discuss some of the issues and concepts about how to move forward involving not just the P5, but also leading non-nuclear weapon states and also nuclear armed states outside the NPT. That requires that some group of states or some state takes the lead and invites, proposes these countries to some sort of convocation. And I would nominate Japan as being one potential convener, and the NPDI, which is another, in addition to the nuclear, the New Agenda Coalition, is another cross-regional grouping of countries, North and South, East and West, that maybe has the potential to do this. In their Hiroshima appeal from their last foreign ministerial meeting in April, they were urging, in one part of their appeal, to have the nuclear armed states outside of the NPT more engaged in the process, as well as China. So, there is going to have to be some new and creative ideas that are put forward that jumpstart this process and leapfrog us from where we are today to a real multilateral conversation. So there may be many other better ideas, but I think it's important that the diplomats and the experts here in the room and elsewhere try to think about that, because this is one of the great conundrums of the global nuclear disarmament cause: how to involve states other than the U.S. and Russia and the P5 in the NPT. All right, we had some other hands up, and if you could raise them again. I see one up here. If we could start up here, and then we'll go back to Mr. Edward Levine, please.
My name is Terry Ellis, and I'm actually with a brand new NGO that's seeking to bring together educators. And my main concern to Secretary Friedt is, I know the Obama administration has done a lot to really reach out to educators, a lot of independent work, and that's the topic which we're trying to discuss among teachers around the world right now, small group. But how do you think the administration respond to the idea of Department of Education being involved in that kind of humanitarian education? It's a big issue, but I've already been experimenting with children of all ages. They are, like you mentioned, many young people have no idea. And it involves science, it involves ethics, it's debate. There's so many ways to engage younger people on this issue. And I think that might be a way that the Obama administration could have an impact, even through their their annual conferences where they're doing online education, trying to do professional development for teachers. For me, it's it's a big issue. So thank you.
All right, that's a great question, and it makes me think about how the core curriculum in our elementary schools can take on arms control and nuclear weapons. And I know my 12-year-old daughter, who's heard this many times, would be well equipped. But very quickly, and then we'll go to the next question.
An 11-year-old, when we were discussing and debating about nuclear weapons, he said, I suggest that every country have one. Can you imagine? Very bright young man, I must say, and I'm looking at him going, but just to say that that's not children even that age.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. All right, Ed Levine, and then we'll respond to both of these questions.
I want to thank both panelists for their presentations. I want to address my question to Ms. Friedt. I listened to your presentation with an eye to the concept of gift baskets. And the interesting thing about the NPT review conference is that we might be expected to have a gift basket rather than just everybody else. And when I listen to what you said, I see maybe two areas in which we might put something in that basket. One being the transparency and verification work, and the other being the nuclear weapons-free zones. And I wonder, on the latter issue, are you expecting to make a push to be able to put that into a gift basket? If so, how? And how will you address the traditional arguments regarding negative security assurances that have undermined progress on those treaties for many years?
Okay. Let me, on the education question, that's a very, certainly welcome all ideas. Yes, the president has a priority on education across the board, I can tell you, and Daryl made a very good point about arms control education in elementary schools. I can tell you one of the things that our bureau, the Arms Control Verification and Compliance Bureau, has been working on is outreach, STEM outreach to the science and technology, and we've done, I have to say, I've been part of it, and it really is very, very rewarding. First time the State Department was involved in the Science and Engineering Festival, the big convention at the Convention Center in April, and we even had a CTBT exhibit there, among others. So really, education is a wonderful idea, and I had not thought of involving the Department of Education, but because I think because of the substantive nature of the disarmament and arms control issue, it's usually done through, the substantive part is handled by the substantive experts, but there's certainly no reason that one could not involve the Department of Education. We'll take a look at that. So thank you, Ed, for your question. On the gift baskets, I love that term from the Nuclear Security Summits. It's a catchy thing. So I had not thought about gift baskets as such for the NPT, but we can kind of loosely use that word for the review conference, but we can use that term. On transparency and verification, yes, very much so. That is a huge priority, and I think that is one of the biggest focuses we have, because unfortunately we have not been able to successfully engage Russia, despite the president's repeated offers, and very good offers, I think, for further reductions in strategic weapons, because we have not made much progress, thanks to our Russian colleagues. Verification and transparency can be one of those issues. The nuclear weapon-free zones, we are very much making a push, as I mentioned in my remarks, for the ratification of the protocols we've signed. We're working with the Southeast Asia on the Southeast Asian zone. The challenges there continue to be, at least certainly in the Southeast Asian zone, that the unfortunate reality is sometimes that the countries themselves, they need to want this more than we want it. They need to all want this, and I think some of the times they're often, we need to work harder on this, there's no question. And then the security assurances. I think everyone's familiar with the 2010 nuclear posture review and our position there. I think this administration has come very far in terms of, further than any other administration, in terms of support for nuclear weapon-free zones, and I think that pretty much speaks for itself.
Right, Gaukhar, do you want to just update people about the Disarmament Education Initiative, which I think is relevant to the question
actually,
that we just heard, and maybe the other question too?
Sure. Actually, these two questions have addressed some of my favorite topics, education and nuclear weapon-free zones. I think the problem with the gift basket of nuclear weapon-free zones is that we've been waiting for the ratification of the protocols to Pelindaba and Rarotonga for some time, and there hasn't been as much as a conversation in the Senate about them. So what can the U.S. bring in terms of a gift basket to the 2015? I'm not sure, because I realistically don't know if the U.S. administration can push now for a conversation in the Senate about, the consent to ratification of these two, plus the Central Asian zone that was just signed, and it's a very peculiar situation there, because I imagine there'll be a hefty list of reservations attached at the ratification stage to that protocol because of some problems with the treaty. And on Schonfels, on the Southeast Asian nuclear weapon-free zone, as I understand, the problem there is that the states parties to that zone do not want protocols to be signed with reservations and interpretive statements. And they're particularly concerned about statements coming from Russia on the transit. How to overcome that in the meantime? Well, that certainly would be a good gift basket if nuclear weapon states were able to overcome that, but that would require them agreeing not to have reservations, which hasn't happened before with any other zone. So if it would be a tremendously great basket if they were to sign a protocol without reservations, but unfortunately I don't really see that happening. And in terms of the whole idea of gift baskets, with relation to the NPT Review Conference, I call them bunnies out of a hat. because we always approach NPT Rio conference as a crisis, and then in the last minute, someone, usually the United States, pulls out something great out of a hat and says, "Look, progress," and everybody says, "Oh, great," and in half of the cases they agree to a final document. So if the U.S. were to pull some kind of a bunny out of a basket, bunny out of a hat, I was thinking not only about transparency verification writ large about reporting on the arsenal, but maybe looking at the fissile material situation. I think there is room for declaring more material in excess, moving it to disposition, making some progress in that respect. And those are real steps. You're really getting rid of material of which nuclear weapons are made, rather than only reporting on what you have. I think that would be a good gift basket. On the education, as was mentioned, it's the other DOE that deals primarily with non-proliferation education, right? The Department of Energy and NSA, and in that sense, not at the high school level, not at the college level, but at the more professional level, the United States has done a tremendous deal on non-proliferation, primarily more than disarmament, for obvious reasons. But there is a good story for the U.S. to tell on its effort to educate about these issues, and the United States has so far failed to tell that story through any kind of official channel in terms of reporting to the UN. There is a UN resolution. There is a report of the Secretary General's Advisory Board on Disarmament Matters that is devoted to education, 34 recommendations for what states can do. And so if you are interested in what US can do, you can really look at those recommendations, see where you can play a role. And there's certainly a big role for the more elementary level, high school level educators. CNS has been a great promoter of education. One of the programs we have is working with high schools in the United States and Russia, and recently I think we added China in bringing together high school teachers, exposing them to issues, having them develop education programs, and then bringing their kids, their students together for presentation of their projects. So it's something that certainly I think the United States can do more, and it's another good story to tell.
Thank you for that. And one other in the theme of gift baskets. I mean, one other thing I would emphasize that is an opportunity still for the United States, and we included this suggestion in the report that we talked about earlier this morning, the Unaffordable Arsenal, which is not just about saving money, a mere $70 billion with respect to the modernization plans, but also outlines the case for further reductions even in this difficult context. And so one of the other opportunities, I think, for President Obama and the administration is to refresh and update and more forcefully articulate the proposal that he put forward in June 2013 in his Berlin speech about being interested and willing to pursue a further 1/3 reduction in U.S. And Russian strategic nuclear weapons. Yes, we need a willing partner with Russia if these are going to be reciprocal, but I think there are ways in which the United States can reformulate that proposal to make it more appealing, and also to, quite frankly, put Russia on the spot for its lack of support for further pursuit of its Article 6 obligations. The United States needs to be careful not to allow itself to be tied to the ball and chain of Russian intransigence and recidivism on nuclear weapons policy. So we have time for a couple more questions before we start to wrap up, and let's go to Mr. Harry Blaney, and then one more on the right. So go ahead, Harry.
Harry Blaney, Center for National Policy. This is a question primarily for Ms. Friedt. Given the current external situation with respect to Russia, but also if you would, the complications of present nuclear weapon states, let's say India and Pakistan, for example, and its nuclear programs. Two things. One, we have not, in this context, discussed deeply the externalities, as one would call it, of the conflicts that, in fact, exacerbate the possibility of non-proliferation and disarmament. that are around the world that seems to me that in tandem need to more be integrated into our policy and strategy with respect to trying to implement the NPT goals. The second question I have to ask is, being an old State Department type, is what has the department done? You can't answer this. Since the president said that given the Congress and given the Senate, and a lot of talk here about passing something by the Senate seems, to be honest with you, a little bit difficult. That's a British understatement. What possibilities are there for executive action, which the president has talked about in a broader context, that we can do ourselves without the possibility of the Congress giving support given the current corrosive political situation? And do you have any thoughts about that you really can share? Thank you.
All right, and then Kathy Robinson on the right in the red, please.
I am Kathy Robinson with Women's Action for New Directions, and I wanted to ask a question that has a lot more to do with magic tricks from a hat rather than gift baskets about the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. This has always been a big part of the of the action plans related to the NPT and been very much of interest of all of the states party to the NPT. And we're really not making any progress towards entry into force at this moment, but there seems to be a growing sort of, this lengthening observation of the moratorium. So my question is sort of generally, how will this issue play at the NPT conference? And for Ms. Friedt in particular, do you see this as providing any opportunities to do more on the sort of education front about lifting up the importance of the Test Ban Treaty and eventually moving it towards ratification?
All right, great. If you could each take those three questions from those two individuals. Anita.
Okay, thanks, Daryl. Okay, first, the very good point about the regional instability or regional challenges. That really cuts to the heart of things, and I'm very glad you raised this. There's been a lot of discussion in academic writings and elsewhere. One of the biggest priorities that we have at the State Department, in fact, in our Bureau, the Arms Control Bureau, is we have the responsibility for extended deterrence commitments. That does not just, that means NATO, that also means Japan, that means South Korea, that means regional stability throughout the world, and that includes missile defense, which is also a huge part and it can be a great addition to regional stability. But you've made an excellent point. Regional stability or regional instability in any region, we talked about the Middle East weapons mass destruction zone and the problems and challenges there. Obviously, that's front and center is the regional instability in the Middle East situation. We have the issue with China. We have the North Korea issue. We have India, Pakistan. There is no question that instability in any region in the world contributes to problems and makes it more difficult for disarmament. There really is a big link to that. And that's one of the things that we are working on, is to how to promote regional strategic stability worldwide to try to address that. Again, through missile defense, through discussions and other various other avenues. Now, you did your second question, you did preface that by saying you probably can't answer it, and you're right. Yes, of course, there are, people always talk about unilateral actions that the president might take. I'll just say, one, I'd like to say we certainly have reiterated, I take your point, Daryl, about the president's June 2013 offer, which we have reiterated repeatedly, and Rose Gottemuller in her speech at the UN First Committee, and there, perhaps we can always do more, but that offer remains on the table. We have, despite the very difficult situation with Ukraine right now, despite the problems we have with Russian implementation of the INF Treaty. We continue to talk to Russia. As I mentioned, we talk to Russia. We've done productive things in the area of Syria chemical weapons. We've done productive areas in terms of, we've had productive relationship in terms of Iran, in terms of negotiations with Iran, and also in terms of cooperation on terrorism with regarding ISIL and such. So our offer stands on the table, so we certainly are ready to try to work on that at any time. With CTBT, that's a difficult issue, and that also speaks to our friends on the Hill, which obviously impact the unilateral actions too, as I might say. But with CTBT, this administration, we've tried, and obviously the political situation is very difficult right now in terms of ratification. That said, I would say in the last couple of months, we raised the level of, I think, the profile on CTBT and the importance of ratification of CTBT numerous times. We had an event in mid-September where we had representatives. We had Secretary of Energy Moniz, Rose Gottemuller, and then a colleague from the Undersecretary from Department of Defense speak at the U.S. Institute of Peace event dedicated to CTBT. Secretary Kerry made a very eloquent speech at the end of September at the UNGA at the Friends of the CTBT event. I mean, he very eloquently spoke about the importance of ratifying this treaty. As you point out, how far we have come since we last tried, at least in the United States, to ratify it in 1999. Real changes, as Secretary Moniz said in his speech, there is no challenge anymore in terms of our laboratories and in terms of the need to test. That's not an issue anymore. We don't need to test. So we continue to make that a priority. Undersecretary Gottemuller, there is no greater proponent of ratification of CTBT than Rose Gottemuller, and she has personally been the leader in terms of efforts to educate both the population in the United States, and this is, again, a generational thing, but also the fact that she pointed out recently, or she points out quite often, that in 1999, I think there was an 85% awareness of what the importance of CTBT and the ratification issue. Now, I don't even want to guess how many people in the United States are aware of what is a CTBT and what is the importance of it. So yes, we have a lot to do in terms of education. We also have a lot to do in terms of educating the Hill, and we're doing this for understandable reasons, given, we'll just say, the politics involved here in the current climate. But we're doing it in a low-key manner because it is important that we continue the education effort. And in the meantime, I think, as Lord Brown has pointed out and others, we've done, the CTBTO, the organization in Vienna, has done incredible things. I've been very lucky to be part of that. We have a big exercise that's coming up in Jordan with the United States again at the forefront in terms of participation and leadership. Rose Gottemuller is going to participate in the VIP event. So we've really done we're definitely working it. So very much appreciate your comments and suggestions, and continue to work for a ratification.
All right, Gaukhar.
Thank you. I'm not sure if anything was addressed to me, but the CTBT, the lack of ratification will be just another sort of item on the list of things not done at the upcoming review conference. No one is holding out expectation that there will be any breakthrough by April. And in some sense, it's good because, I mean, I think a lot of states, most states have recognized that right now the treaty is a victim of domestic politics. Does it make them particularly happy with the administration? Not necessarily, but I think most states recognize that this is kind of stuck in a situation out of the president's hands. If there were to be progress on the CTBT, I think it would improve the atmosphere tremendously. That said, I'll be a little cautious because it's like a payment on the overdue interest on an old loan. It's a really old loan, and the interest payment is really overdue. So if you pay it, the bank will be happy, but it won't forgive the loan. So that would be my long-term perspective. But you're right that CTBT is very, very tightly linked to the NPT and the very promise of nuclear disarmament. So it would be a very important step for the United States to ratify wherever it actually gets around to it. But it shouldn't be surprised that there are other proposals and other ideas coming up in the meantime, because people cannot sit and wait for the domestic situation to resolve and put everything on hold in terms of disarmament. And in terms of things that the U.S. administration could do without the Senate, I will not be terribly original. President Obama can go back to the June statement about the possibility of further reductions and say, and think at least, I've been a leader on this, or at least I came in as a leader on this in the Prague speech and in the overall sort of direction of the administration. I'm going to finish my presidency as a leader on this, and I will do this unilaterally. There is absolutely no strategic reason, I think, for the United States to wait for Russia to do the exact same kind of mirror reductions. I think the United States has already decided it can guarantee security of itself and its allies at exactly the same level with fewer weapons. So you can wait for an obstinate partner to come around and dance, or you can just go to the dance floor and show how it's done.
All right, well, I want to thank both of you for your remarks, your answers to these tough questions. Many of these are not yet answerable at this stage in the process, but I can guarantee you that the Arms Control Association will come back in the spring with probably another forum about the NPT situation and what can be done beyond the May conference, as well as to talk about what more President Obama can do in his final 2 years of his second administration to realize the promise of the Prague agenda. But for now, please join me in thanking these two for their remarks. And before we break up for the day, we're at the end of our program. I want to just offer a couple of reminders and thank yous. First of all, to my great staff for pulling together all the pieces that make up an annual meeting, to Shervin Turan and Tim Farnsworth for their meeting organization skills, and also to Tim Farnsworth, our communications director, on the launching of our new website, and we really do want your feedback on that. It's a work in progress, and after looking at the website for 15 years myself, I'm still getting used to it. I'm sure you'll have to get used to it a little bit too. We'd appreciate your feedback on that. And I want to thank our excellent board of directors. Many of board members are here. John Isaacs here earlier, Paul Walker, Michael Clare, and others who I may be missing. But thanks for all your hard work and help in leading the organization. We will have online in the next couple of days a video, what do we call it? A video archive of this event. This has been webcast. It'll be up there. For those of you who don't want to relive it in the full time it takes to look at it, there will also be a transcript provided by our friends at Federal News Service that will be up in maybe 3 or 4 days. Finally, a couple of reminders about upcoming Arms Control Association events. We do have a reception for all of you this evening, beginning at 5 o'clock. Not here at Carnegie, at a much more exciting, non-work oriented place. It's the Beacon Sky Bar, which is at 1615 Rhode Island, just a couple blocks south of here. That'll begin at 5 o'clock, go to about 7 o'clock, and you should have received a blue ticket for a complimentary drink if you want to join us, and for an informal conversation about today's event and other things. Also, on October 29th, here at Carnegie, we will have another event on the Iran nuclear issue that we're co-hosting with the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. Bishop Pates will be reporting on the delegation that he led back in March to Tehran to talk with senior Iranian religious leaders about the morality of nuclear weapons, the fatwa of the Supreme Leader, and our board chairman, John Steinbrenner, will be one of the other speakers at that event. He accompanied them on that trip. And finally, in December, on December 12th, we're going to be hosting a conference on chemical and biological arms control in the name of our former board member, Jonathan Tucker. There'll be more details about that coming out in the coming days. So thank you very much, everyone, for being here. We'll see you again soon.